Dear students, today let us discuss about the next important act, that is the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. So this is also an important act under labor legislations. So in the previous class we discussed about Factories Act of 1948. Now related to that, we will be discussing about Minimum Wages Act 1948. To start with, so let us try to understand why we are discussing about this act here, because once we know what is a factory and what are the important provisions that will be provided under Factories Act and why and to whom, so again we can answer to these questions, as it is an important the obligation of an occupier to provide such necessary conditions to the working for such premises or the factories. So when such workers are working for the factories, then the necessary condition arises with respect to their remuneration or the reward. So that reward or remuneration they will be paid as wages. So again, to avoid any the deviations in the remuneration or the wages, so some minimum wage has been fixed by the government, so that we will be discussing here to avoid the exploitation of workers, maybe in terms of work or hours of work that they will be working. So now let us understand the history of minimum wages. This initiative has been taken by Sri KGR Chowdhury in 1920, where he set up boards for determination of wages. So we know about industrial revolution and the exploitation of workers. No, so during the pre-independence period and even after the independence, in post-independence era. So to again safeguard or protect such workers from the hands of capitalists, so these measures has been taken by the government, and the International Labour Conference adopted Convention number 26 and 30 in 1928 relating to wage fixing machinery in trades or parts of trades. So the later minimum wages bill was introduced in the Central Legislative Assembly on 11/4/1946 and came into force with effect from 15/3/1948. Now let us understand what is a minimum wage. The Minimum Wages Act 1948 was to secure the welfare of unorganized workers in certain industries by fixing the minimum rates of wages. The Act contemplates that minimum wages rates must ensure for him not only his subsistence and that of his family, but also preserve his efficiency as a workman. And this act empowers the appropriate government for fixation of minimum wages in employments and enumerated in the schedule to the act. Now let us understand the objectives of this act. The objectives include to provide minimum wages to the workers working in organized sectors and to stop exploitation of the workers, to empower the government to take steps for fixing minimum wages and to revise it in a timely manner. So this is very important, and also to apply this law on most of the sections in organized sector. Now coming to the short titles and the extent. So here we call in this act, the minimum wages, we call that as a Minimum Wages Act of 1948, where it extends to the whole of India, and this act may be called the Minimum Wages Act also. Now let us try to understand some important terminologies, that is employer, wages and employee. We know who is an employer. He is also called as an occupier in Factories Act. Here he is called as an employer, means any person who employs one or more employees in any schedule of employment. That person we call as an employer. And wages, it means all remunerations capable of being expressed in terms of money, that we call as wages. And employee means any person employed for a hire or reward and includes an outworker. Now coming to the fixation and revision of minimum wages. Fixing of minimum rates of wages according to section 3 means the minimum rates of wages will be revised for every 5 years by the appropriate government. Then appropriate government can add any employment to the schedule, that is part 1 or part 2, wherein 1000 or more employees are found working. Different minimum rates of wages may be fixed for different scheduled employments or different classes of work or different localities. Now let us understand what is a minimum rate of wage. So minimum rate of wage means it includes a basic plus special allowance which varies with the cost of living index. So that we call as basic pay or basic allowance, and basic plus cash value of concessional supply of materials like food, clothes, etc., or an all inclusive rate which includes basic plus cost of living allowance plus cash value of concessional supply of materials. Like it could be one total sum or could be the components of these. So maybe some amount as basic plus special allowance or basic plus cash value of the necessary materials, some additional value, or maybe combination of all these. And now let us understand, so what are the procedures for fixing and revision of minimum rates of wages, so under section 5. So here first they have to publish its proposals in the official gazette asking comments from the affected parties, and it should constitute committees or subcommittees for the purpose, and the committees or subcommittees and advisory boards constituted by the government consists of equal number of members of employers, employees, and independent persons. So why? Because they will be representing their community. Employers, they represent the employers, and a person worker represents employees, like that. So the procedure includes, first, the first step is the recommendation of advisory board for different class, that is different types of workers like unskilled, skilled, clerk or supervisor, and that recommendations has to be published in national publications for public comments or representation from trade unions, and some time will be given for that. And later the discussions will be in terms of hearing of the representatives will be done. So the representatives from employers, employees, and independent people that will happen, and finally the notification of minimum wages. After the hearing, by looking at the opinion or their consent, by taking their consent, the minimum wage will be fixed. So this will be again done by an advisory board, or a committee will be appointed for again resolving any issues that they come across in this fixation of minimum wages. And the advisory board constitutes, so it will be working at the central level and also at the state level. Then again, so some procedure about composition of such committees at central level and state level also we have to know. And here comes the payment of minimum wages. The payment, again, so some necessary conditions they have to meet with respect to payment of wages. That is, the government, appropriate government may authorize, where there has been a custom of payment in this manner, payment of minimum wages either wholly or partly in kind. And it has to be the payment of wages less than minimum wages on the ground of less performance or output is illegal. Whatever the minimum wage has been fixed, the payment of wage should be more than that. the minimum wages has to be paid without any deductions other than statutory deductions. So like that, some conditions they have to meet with respect to hours, that is fixing of hours of work, and again the payment towards that also has to be fixed. So as overtime wages and wages for a person who has worked less than normal working hours, and records, what are the records that has to be maintained, and different claims. So suppose any grievances are there from employer side or employer side, that such claims has to be discussed. So if any major deviations we come across, so such employer has to furnish some penalties. So that we will be discussing as an offense or punishment. Payment of less than minimum wage as to employee, where the employer is punishable with an imprisonment which may extend up to 6 months, or fine which may extend up to 500, or both. So this is about Minimum Wages Act. And here for providing such wages, the employer will undergo a contract with the worker, so that we call as contracting out. So that we will be discussing under section 25. Any contract or agreement, whether made before or after the commencement of this act, whereby an employer either relinquishes or reduces his right to a minimum rate of wages, or any privilege or concession occurring to him under this act, shall be null and void so far as it purports to reduce the minimum rate of wages fixed under this act. That is, any contract or agreement has to be made, so with respect to the working hours and the minimum rate what has been fixed at the time of joining. So that has to be, some necessary document has to be maintained. And here again we have to know about the power of state government to add schedule. Suppose any changes or amendments has to be made with respect to minimum fixation of minimum wages, that is looking at the living cost. Suppose it has to be increased, means again the that power lies with the state government as well as the central government. So this we will be discussing under section 21, 27 and 28. So this is about Minimum Wages Act of 1948. Now in continuation with this, we shall discuss the payment of wages also, because once we know the Minimum Wages Act, so here we understood the fixation of minimum wages, then we have to discuss about the Payment of Wages Act. So how such fixed wages has to be paid. Again here some necessary conditions the employer has to meet with respect to date, time and the mode of payment. So that comes under Payment of Wages Act of 1936. The objectives of this act is to regulate the payment of wages to certain classes of employed persons, that is that has to be paid on the first the date of payment of wages, and secondly the deductions. So here in this act we speak about two things. One is payment of wages and the second one is deductions from the wages. So coming to payment of wages, we know what is a wage. Wage includes any remuneration or which is payable under any reward or settlement between the parties, or under of a court, or overtime work, or a holiday, or any leave period, or any additional remuneration under the terms of employment, where wage does not include any bonus, pension fund or provident fund, travelling allowances and any gratuity. So that we cannot call as wage. They are the additional, the special allowances or additional allowances that will be paid along with the wage. and wages to be paid in current coins or currency notes. So this is an important the criteria that has to be followed, and also the time of payment of wages. So when it has to be paid. So suppose in a premises where more than 1000 workers before the expiry of the 10th day of the following month, no, the wages has to be paid, or drawing average wage up to rupees 6500 per month as amended with effect from 6th September of 2005. So on every 7th day of the following month or the maximum of 10th day of the following month, the wage has to be paid. And coming to important deductions that can be made from the wages. So here we discuss about fines, then deduction for amenities and services supplied by the employer, and advances paid, overpayment of wages, loan granted for house building or other purposes. And deductions made from the wages like income tax payable in pursuance of the order of the court, and PF contributions, cooperative societies, premium for life insurance, contribution to any fund constituted by the employer or a trade union, and employees towards ESI. So these are the important deductions that usually happens under this act. And at the end penalties, we have to know why, because it makes contravention of section 5, 7, 9, 11 and 13 of the act by any person responsible for payment of wages to an employed person, punishable with fine which shall not be less than 1500 rupees, but which may extend up to 7500 rupees. So this is the penalty for any deviations with respect to the time and deduction by the employers. So this is about payment of wages.